which wasn't hard to do. Then if you have a local university, and I had Columbia and Fordham, almost anyone trumps a school authority. If you have a large business in your area, you can work out some project with the public relations department, and once the school knows that, I don't know, General Electric has signed off on this, would they really be so bold as to say, I'm sorry, you can't do this because, because we're reading Dick and Jane or Jack London? So I would, over the course of a few years, I would develop so many ligatures of power, always through quid pro quo. I never ask for a favor, never. I tell kids that. Always have something to trade. And what you have to trade with other institutions or with a political club is a whole lot of good publicity for them. In some cases, publicity leading to federal requirements for, funds, subsidies, contracts. That was the easiest sell in the world.
Very interesting.
I was doing this for 120 kids all by myself, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. If there were any difficulty doing this, I certainly would have run into it. The prodigies of work wouldn't have allowed any more work to be added on top of it. So
interesting. This roots out standardization at its core, correct?
Yeah. What people ought to ask someone like me, who was in the classroom for 30 years and taught some of the richest kids in the country and a lot of the poorest kids in the country and a whole lot of, quote, professional groups in between, because I'm on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm a block from the Museum of Natural History and 5 blocks from the Opera. It's just a wealthy part of the world, but it buses in a lot of poor kids in order to add money to the schools. And what I discovered, I didn't start from a traditional liberal background. I'm one of the handful of founders of the New York State Conservative Party. I don't belong anymore because it was hard to find anybody in the Conservative Party who wasn't a wild-eyed radical. They weren't conservative at all. They were people like George Bush, who reserved the right to attack countries that hadn't attacked us, reserved the right to triple the size of government, to spend money he didn't have. I mean, that's a conservative. So anyway, what I discovered by the presentation of the kids year in, year out was there's almost no difference between the Harlem kid and the surgeon's son. There's almost no difference in intellectual power. The difference is in the idiom they use and their understanding of how society works and the targets they're chasing. Well, I made those things that I just said to you the substance of the curriculum. And it was like rain falling on a parched garden. I could tell that almost immediately the kids understood, all the kids understood that there was something useful to them going on. Anybody could do this. It doesn't cost anything. We think it costs a lot because it only occurs in expensive boarding schools. So we assume that it's the expense that's causing the intellectual growth or the imaginative growth, and it's not. It's the methodology, which anyone can use.
Very exciting.
It really is exciting. And look, what about the national wealth it unleashes? That was our secret back in 1820, that everybody had a chance to have a say, to have a seat at the table. It didn't matter if they lived in a shack if they had a good idea and if they worked hard. No other country did that. They were all rigidly class-based. That's how we got so rich and so powerful. And we've been coasting on that wealth ever since. And it's diminished and diminished and diminished. And now, basically, all we have left is the biggest Army, Navy, and Air Force in the world.
Talk a little bit about Carroll Quigley and his book, Tragedy and Hope.
I guarantee anyone listening, if you get Mr. Quigley's book and read it cover to cover, set it aside, and 90 days later, this is essential, read it again with a notebook in your hand, you will have the finest education you could imagine. Mr. Quigley Dr. Quigley was the head of the Foreign Service Department at Georgetown University. You with an international reputation, one that draws people from the strongest families in the country, and one which drew young Bill Clinton, who had Dr. Quigley as his personal tutor at Georgetown. Quigley's the only man who's ever been allowed to examine the private files of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he wrote a book in 1968, published by Macmillan, called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. I believe it's like 1,300 pages long. It's brilliantly written, so you never feel the way you do sometimes in the face of a ponderous book. Oh my God, is there more to read? He's a brilliant writer. Mr. Quigley simply starts off by saying that nothing you have ever learned about the 20th century is actually the way it happened. And he explains that bit by bit throughout the 20th century, a group of, usually men, but a group of prominent individuals in England and Australia and the United States and Germany and France decided that the world had no future unless it was going to be brought into a unitary government under the command of the English-speaking nations. There's a little bit of brass in there. Quigley says that the wars have been arranged. Now, don't anybody say this is a conspiracy theory, because Quigley somewhere else in the book says, I approve of this, I don't approve of the secrecy behind it. So Quigley says the wars have been arranged so that the aggressor nation will have a little bit of free run to break down the cultures and the governments of the nations around it, and then the English-speaking nations will step in and put it out of business, but they'll be one step closer to a global government, because what the barriers are that prevents that from happening are cultures, religions, strong family ties, love of this place rather than every place. And all those things had to be broken down before you could realistically put it under centralized political control. And Quigley then lays down a track. Oh my goodness, Kim. I'm even speechless now. I mean, I've read the book 6 times. I'm speechless now at the brilliance.
I'm about to buy it.
He has the names, the addresses, exactly the moments when these things were done. Britain in the Second World War had not only a larger air force than Germany's, but it had a more modern air force than Germany's.